Hey, well, first of all, I'd like to say, and I is big gonna find me, because I want to be a part of this fucking dumb wannabe tennis tour.
You know, I think they got his testicles so far up their mouths that this is bullshit, you know?
I'm not thinking about that right now. I'm just thinking about having won the world title and hopefully trying to win another one someday. You just drop in and just smack the quarterback. Drop down, snap, Well, I'll tell you, Stu, I did battle some humongous waves.
Oh, just a paper plane?
Oh, surf looks good on it.
Not bad.
Ain't that swell with Jed and Vaughn.
Oh, those guys are back!
Get a haircut.
Hey, how are you, bro?
Homie to Souza. Yeah, mate. Good, bro.
Yeah, sick. What's going on?
Oh, man, just cruising, eh? What's happening with you? You look like you're perched up in some kind of typically slummy setup in Sumbawa, is it? Maybe? I'm just guessing. I feel like I've stayed in that room.
In Bali at the moment, eh?
Oh, you're still in Bali? Nice.
Yeah. Set up here for a month or two, and then I'll probably start. Sort of just bought a motorbike, so I'm gonna try and ride across to Timor.
Oh, classic. Fuck
yeah.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. So probably try and ride across most of the archipelago, eh? Yeah.
That's classic, man. I've ridden as far as Sumbawa, and are you gonna do it alone?
Yeah, just solo, eh? Just bought this old trail bike, and bro, see how far I can get, eh? It's been 4 months or something.
Yeah, that's a smart purchase. The trail bike is the go. The old Vario rental scooter, wouldn't recommend it, to be honest.
Yeah, pushing the limits of the machine there a bit,
100%, man. That's gonna be classic. So how long you been in Indo for, and what's you been getting some waves?
Been surfing a bit. I did an internship with the BBC in Jakarta like maybe 5 or 6 months ago.
Wow.
And sort of since then, like I kind of had this dream of sort of riding across most of the archipelago. Like in the last year or two, a few things have changed in my life, and it sort of felt like now is the right time to give it a crack. I came end of May, sort of 31st of May. I've been here and just kind of hang in Bali for a month or two. Get set up, just do the odd little trip to sort of test things out, work out what I need, and then probably another month, I'd say.
Wow.
We'll start cruising, eh?
That's fascinating, man. So I mean, we'll get into your story shortly, but yeah, the BBC outpost in Jakarta doing the internship. How'd you find that?
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I didn't like it's a pretty full-on place, Jakarta, eh?
Oh.
At first I kind of didn't really like it that much at all. It was pretty, like, the traffic and the pollution is pretty in your face. But yeah, I mean, I kind of, like, after about 6 weeks, I was sort of hating it and like looking for an escape, and I sort of went, I'm probably never going to come to this place again unless I've got like a reason like this to be here. So I sort of thought, well, I'm here, may as well just see what it's got to offer. And actually after that, I kind of didn't mind it, I sort of started enjoying it. The nightlife there's pretty wild. And yeah, it's just a pretty different place, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on, things you'd sort of never see. Different places and that. So it was cool. It was a cool experience,
Yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I spent a lot of time with people who've spent a lot of time there. And I guess back in the day, it was all about Stadium nightclub, which was, I don't know if have you heard of Stadium?
Yeah, I heard of Stadium. Yeah.
What have you heard about Stadium?
Oh, I was there. I think when I was there, it had been shut down already. So yeah, sort of place like this pretty much doesn't close from Thursday to Tuesday or something.
Yeah, it sounded psycho. Like, I heard the reason they shut it down ultimately was because a cop died of a drug overdose in there. And it was a place where drugs were sold, so freely. And I remember when they shut it down, there was this famous Dutch DJ who DJ'd all over the world, and he's like, if you think Berlin's crazy, mate, you got to check Stadium out. Like, it's fucking next level, which is a wild concept because as you know, like, Indonesia's so against drugs officially, but not if you're an Indonesian elite. Like, then you can do drugs pretty freely, and there's just a whole different set of rules for that mob. But Yeah, fuck, man. What else? Like Jakarta, like, yeah, try to paint the scene for us, man. I again don't know that much about it. Have barely ever left the airport there. I know that there, it's the birthplace of Marginal, which is like Indonesia's probably most beloved punk band, and they used to fucking run like a commune for underprivileged kids in the sewers and shit. Like like so crazy, just the level of poverty, but then the level of like activism and some like hardcore kind of socialist punk actors and people in that part of the world. It's like there's a lot going on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was like one thing I found pretty interesting there. It was like there was not really much of a middle class, There was kind of really poor, and then like just like uber rich, and sort of not really much in between, So yeah, I was kind of living in South Jakarta. Office was not far from there. I did one story about like how the city's sinking. So basically, like all the hotels, like all the hotels and business, because there's not a lot of places don't have like they're not on mains water, So a lot of people just kind of tap into drill down and tap into the groundwater. And because so many people are pilfering all this water from sort of under the underground, it's kind of created this massive vacuum, and the weight of the city's just sort of slowly sinking down. So it was wild, sort of going
like a soggy Tim Tam that you've been sucking milk through.
Yeah, pretty much. That's a good way to describe Jakarta, eh? Yeah.
Jesus. That's a wild yarn. And yeah, what was going on inside the decorated halls of the BBC, man? Like, frick, that's, I guess in some ways the most respected English-speaking news network in the world, but in other ways, my observations of it seems to be pretty well gutted by bourgeois elites, like most other media agencies. Like, fuck, they all seem to be like that these days.
Yeah. It was good. It was like I'd graduated a journalism degree a year before, and I sort of, I was kind of testing the waters with the whole office thing and trying to work out whether that was for me or not. And I sort of thought, if I'm going to do it, I may as well have a red hot go at it. So yeah, went to Jakarta and did that with the BBC. It was good. It was really challenging. It's like everything was in Indonesian, like editorial meetings, interviews, writing stories, and then having to translate them into Indonesian. So it was good. It was a steep learning curve. I enjoyed that. I suppose the office there in Indonesia was probably more like casual and laid back, a little bit more Indonesian than say like somewhere in London. I mean, you could wear thongs to work and that sort of thing, which it suited me. It was pretty cool.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So you're now fairly fluent in Bahasa then, I'd imagine.
Yeah, like I suppose the difficult thing is within every language there's kind of different levels, like you got sort of the basic level that you speak on the street, and then the language you speak in the office, it's almost like an entirely different language. So that was sort of one thing to wrap my head around. But yeah, I mean, I suppose like traveling around Indonesia, I think that's probably one of the best tools you can have. I mean, language, it's also kind of a window into the soul of a people. I mean, I think one thing I find interesting is like within certain languages there'll be certain phrases or ways of looking at the world that are unique to that kind of people, and there's actually almost no literal translation into another language. So I feel like by understanding a language, you get to see how a certain people sort of are and the way that they look at the world.
Mate, that is so true. Without the language, you really only ever get a surface level appreciation of a place and its people, and you miss out on so much, all the bits of humor and the observation. And there's also like just so much respect given to you as soon as you can speak their language. It's like a sign that you've really, taken the time to take an interest in their culture. And yeah, I feel like they're always a little bit shocked when you can speak even basic Bahasa, let alone have a good handle of it.
For sure. Yeah. And I suppose it adds like another dimension to this adventure as well. I mean, I mean, surfing's kind of a primary motivation for this, but I suppose it's really a cultural adventure with kind of surfing as a backdrop. It's such a diverse and unique place, Indonesia. Everywhere you go, the people are so different, I suppose, because there's so many islands. They've kind of evolved distinctly to one another. So yeah, it'll be cool to sort of get a glimpse into that as well.
Yeah, that is fascinating about Indonesia. 18,000 islands, and a lot of them have their own language, huh? Like,
Hmm.
Bahasa was like the one that they kind of blanketed on top of the joint to create a bit of cohesion linguistically. But yeah,
Hmm.
so many different dialects in the zone. And
Hmm.
any good waves, man? You been scoring over there?
Uh, yeah, been surfing a bit. When sort of went over to G-Land for the first time. Went to deserts for the first time. Yeah, pretty phenomenal to see deserts. Like I've never seen waves like that before. Eh? It's just like, yeah, just completely like sort of melted my mind. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, it's so perfect and yeah, like like something out of it, something out of a cartoon book or something. It's kind of like, oh. But yeah, the crowd was pretty ferocious. It's sort of
Yeah.
my first time out there, so I didn't really get the one I wanted. But yeah, it was sick to sort of test it out, and I'll be back there soon for sure.
Yeah, so crazy. Just that
Mm.
blue water, eh? When the color of
Mm.
the water and the light offshore, and when it all just starts
Yeah,
lining
yeah,
up, it's fully mesmerizing.
yeah, for sure.
Mate, yeah, let's get into your story. I mean, fucking hell, it's a wild journey you've been on, and full credit
Mm.
to you for being in the nick you're in now, and surfing and committing to choosing life and all that
Mm.
entails. But let's go back to, I guess, the dark point first, and that was shooting up meth for the first time, man. And
Mm.
in some of your written work, you've painted a really good picture of what that was like. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, probably sort of when I was about, I sort of had my first shot of ice when I was 15. Like I'd kind of dabbled with heroin and opiates and that sort of thing before. It never really appealed to me that much. Like it made me sick. I like the rush of it straight away, but it made me sick. It made me itchy. And I suppose I think like when it comes to heavy drugs, I think people prefer different substances for different reasons. I think people who sort of go down the route of downers and opiates, they're almost trying to numb some sort of pain, whereas I think with stimulants like ice, it's like you're trying to bring a part of trying to bring a part of yourself out that maybe you can't find or you're not in touch with. So yeah, I mean, I kind of went looking for it. I found it, and sort of straight away, it's like it's the most potent thing I've ever felt. Yeah, it just, everything, all my problems just seemed to disappear and melt away. And it kind of just like, it just felt I was flying, like I was on top of the world. Yeah. Mm.
And talk us through that day that it happened. Like how old were you, and who facilitated it for you? Where did it go down? That kind of stuff.
Mm. Yeah, so I was 15. Um, I'd just come back from working away. I'd been working down the furniture truck, so I had a bit of cash. And my mate Jesse, I sort of, yeah, I kind of asked him. I said, "Oh, do you know where I can get near this?" And he introduced me to his mate Maddo. Maddo was 35 at the time, so he was 20 years older than me. He was disordered with mental illness. Yeah, like manic bipolar. And he sort of had like he had this shaved head with skulls tattooed over his head. Um, and I mean, like he was an interesting character matter. He was like he he didn't necessarily he wasn't sort of out there taking kids off the street corner and bringing them in and getting them hooked on ice. He was kids would come to him who were sort of already in this world and who had lost their way. And Maddo sort of saw that these are kids who needed some guidance. If nobody guided them through this world, then people would take advantage of them. And so he was sort of like, if you've ever read Oliver Twist, he's a little bit like Fagin from Oliver Twist. He's kind of taking people under his wing and showing them the ropes, and obviously it was for his own benefit as well. But yeah, he sort of, yeah, we were in his block of East Perth flats. Pretty sure they were housing commission flats. And yeah, he did me up with like a packet of ice or something, and yeah, I mean, straight away, like that feeling, the rush. I spent the next probably 3 or 4 years chasing that feeling.
Mm. And I mean, out of all the drug addicts that you would have been hanging out with at this point, you know, what led them to drug addiction a lot of the time? Was there any recurring themes in terms of what led people to that point?
Yeah, I think usually it's family, you know. There's some sort of breakdown in the family structure. And I think people go searching for that, you know. I think it's not so much the drugs that people get addicted to, but the things that are missing from their life. And sort of within that world, there was kind of almost this sense of family, you know. It was sort of a false sense because it was all sort of linked by drugs, and it wasn't real, you know. The drugs were the only thing that were keeping a lot of us together. There's not many people, probably only one or two from that world who I still have contact with, you know. So yeah, I think for a lot of people it was something that had been missing from their childhood, some kind of sense of family or some sort of sense of belonging or love, and you know, it went looking for that down this sort of cul-de-sac of drugs and you know, violence and crime and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I've kind of distilled good mental health down to being really about having a lot of energy, like high energy, and there's good and bad energy. But, you know, generally, like if you got a lot of energy, to me, it seems that you're generally feeling pretty good. And that's what meth gives you. It gives you a ton of energy. So you might have been feeling low energy before that. You might be feeling low energy all the time. And low energy can be the result of poor sleeps, constant stress, trauma, and there's just no respite from the fucking endless funk of low energy. And then ice, you know, enables you to feel a rush of energy. And I guess with that energy comes confidence and all manner of kind of positive emotions or thoughts or ideas, but they're not really based in reality because of the drug. But yeah, I mean, moving forward, I guess we're kind of jumping to the end of the story, but at least for me these days, I mean, I never went down the route of drugs, but there's a lot of methods out there available that can create similar levels of energy that are much more based in reality. And, you know, at the end of the day, will ultimately put you to sleep when you're meant to go to bed, as opposed to keep you up for days on end. You know, your breath works, Wim Hof, meditation, exercise, surfing, all these kinds of things. Is that a fairly accurate summation of meth and what leads people to taking that drug?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, like, you know, that energy that it gives you. I mean, yeah, it certainly, like, it made a lot of those problems disappear and go away, and sort of made me feel like I was on top of the world and none of that mattered and I could go and do anything. But it's completely false as well, you know, because it's an entirely chemical sensation, you know. And I suppose, I mean, I think what it really comes down to is everyone's kind of looking for joy and everyone's looking for meaning in life, you know. And I sort of found myself in these circumstances where I had that idea of how to find that and what that is. I had it confused, you know. I kind of went looking for the easy option. I sort of went looking for a shortcut, and I think there are really no shortcuts in life, you know. It's only through the work and through the hard work that you can achieve and accomplish these things.
Mate, that's so true. Like, you know, what you said about ice just being a chemical rush, even like Wim Hof and exercise and all these things are also just a chemical rush. They're just a slightly different set of chemicals. And as you mentioned, they're chemicals that you have to earn. And that's like the karma or the cosmic joke of life, is that there is no shortcuts. Nothing's given for free. And the only things that make us happy are a little bit difficult. If there's no difficulty attached to it, there's no happiness either. And so that's just the price of admission on planet Earth. And the quicker you wrap your head around that, the better you're going to be, and everyone around you for that matter.
It's true, and it's like you know, meditation and yoga and those sorts of things. They're pure as well, you know. They're completely pure. It's like my yoga is one thing that's really helped me. And my brother, he went to prison not long ago, like a few years ago, and while he was in there, he discovered yoga, and he said about it, he's like, oh, this is incredible, you know. It's like getting stoned without smoking any cones, you know.
Seriously, yeah, it really is so calming. And Yeah, so much physical strength and flexibility, and it's endless the benefits that come from stuff like that.
For sure, and it's pure too. So things like that, they're pure. No one can take them away from you. They're not as ephemeral as drugs, where it's just kind of a flash and then it's gone. And you're chasing that feeling all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I found approaching all these methods like yoga and breathwork, meditation. So like surfing's a hard one because it's so self-absorbed. But generally all the other ones, when you do it with a group, it makes it easier, the actual practice itself. And then you get to also share the benefits of that exercise with each other. And it's just kind of like a double bonus. Whereas doing it on your own, it's hard to motivate yourself sometimes. And I find like doing that collective work is super powerful. And interesting, like, so we're kind of getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but for you, sport was a massive part of rehabilitating yourself. And sport is something that is done in collectives. It's done at gyms. It's done in football clubs. And you did all this stuff. You were into boxing, into football, and into surfing. And talk us through, what kind of a role sport played for you in lifting you out of the doldrums.
Yeah, I think sort of coming off the ice, like there was a need to kind of replace that rush with something else, like it leaves a massive hole in you. And there was a real need, like, to fill that void with something else. And for me in the beginning, that was sport, I suppose, because a lot of sport is, it's so intertwined with health, So, feeling healthy and feeling good about myself, it motivated me not to kind of go back down that path. It's like, I feel good. I don't want to destroy that, and it also gave me like something of an endorphin rush, going surfing, going to the gym, like there is a real chemical rush that comes after that. And it's like, that there was a need to use that to replace ice. Over time, it's come to be more about balance as well, and like finding a balance in life. I think like in the beginning, it was kind of all just swayed to the one side. I was just putting everything into that, and it was pretty much just a distraction. I was using those things to kind of take myself away from life and to feel good about myself. But I think, it's important to kind of to cultivate yourself, and to find balance and to understand, not just to try and distract yourself from these things, but to try and understand why. Why am I feeling this way? Where did these things come from? What can I like? How can I respond differently to those things? Sport helped a lot, but it's not the entire answer. I think the people sometimes ask, they say, "Oh, what's the answer?" I wish it was that simple. It's so multifaceted. There's so many different things going on. It's like it takes a long time. Even now, still, like, I wonder if I still.
Yeah, got you back.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, lost you
cool.
for a sec there.
Yeah, you were just saying, even now, I still and then it kind of cut out. You're talking about just trying to get to the root cause of things, I guess.
Yeah. I suppose like drugs is like, especially a drug like ice, it's that potent and that sinister. I think once you inject something, you kind of you're actually crossing like a physical threshold that you can never really truly come back from, I think, and like I wonder sometimes if that will stay with me forever. It's still something I think about from time to time. And it's like, it just comes out of nowhere too. That's the frightening thing. It's like, where did this come from? Why am I feeling like that? And I suppose that's I think really the key to all this is the key to a lot of things in life is that self-awareness. I don't think we can't change the things that have happened in our life, the circumstances, the way in which we might have been like programmed or designed a certain way. But I think by being self-aware, you can come to understand these things and change the way in which we respond to them. You know, I think that's all that anyone can do.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and when those impulses or emotions arise, you know, you can't control them. All you can do is sit with them and observe them, and hopefully, like you said, through self-awareness and a level of detachment, just watch them, observe them, become the witness. That's what they all say. And the only way to get to that point, as far as I know, is through meditation. And we've seen the likes of Tom Carroll, you know, tread a very similar path to yourself and use that tool to pull him out of the abyss. And as a result, like yourself, is, you know, he's a bit further down the track, but you know, he's a fucking absolute patron saint of like transcendence and the correct way to conduct yourself in life, I feel like. So yeah, the tools are there, but it's a I can only imagine a painstaking journey at times, and it's also must be quite a bitter pill to swallow, just for a lot of people, knowing that your only route out of this situation is doing this kind of hard, fairly solitary work that is just so far from your identity. You know, you build an identity over years of being a hoodlum or a drug addict or in prison, and then someone goes like, well, your best chance of rehabilitating is to do yoga and meditation. Like, try telling that to people in jail, like they'll fucking laugh at you, man. But it is what it is, and that it is all there is.
Yeah, it's true. It's like, and I think like the hardest part about giving up drugs is not so much like getting sober is kind of the easy part. It's like the hardest part is having to rebuild your whole entire life again from scratch. You know, you got to get rid of all your friends. You sort of have to rid yourself of your own identity and your own idea of who you were. You know, you have to try and change that. And that's the hard part. That's something that takes years. You know, that doesn't come easy. For me, it's been a long struggle. But I suppose now I kind of live a different kind of life. And I suppose I've designed that life and I've built that life around those things that have been really important to me and have helped steer me on that journey. You know, like freedom. Like it's something. I suppose going to juvenile detention and going to prison, it's something that you like. It's kind of hard to learn to reappreciate that sense of freedom again. I mean, I think those sorts of institutions, they institutionalize you in a way that makes you hard. It doesn't really set anybody up to help them succeed, you know. It kind of traps you within that system, and coming out of that system, it's kind of difficult to learn to reappreciate that freedom again, you know. Because I mean, for a lot of people, like if you got difficult stuff going on outside, I think for a lot of people pretty easy, you know. You go in there. You get 3 meals a day, you get a shower, you don't have to make any difficult decisions. Like a lot of people, you just kind of put your head down and just do the time, you know. And then it's like coming out, you're on your own, you know. Often you have to sort of deal with a lot of the difficult things that led to you going in there in the first place, and you come out and you're entirely alone on that journey. A lot of people can't cope with that, you know. They go, oh, well, jail's just an easy. I'll just go back to, like, people in there used to joke and say, oh, you know, this kid, he's just coming here for a feed and a shower, you know. So, yeah.
It's a crazy concept for ordinary folk to wrap their head around, that jail's like a holiday from life for a lot of people. And therefore, there is no disincentive to play up on the outside. In fact, there's an incentive to play up on the outside. And that's a fucking broken system, because when people play up on the outside, we've got to deal with it. So, you know, all the petty thievery and petty thuggery and that kind of shit that is just ultimately a fucking scourge on society, that is being incentivized and created by the prison system, creating disastrous outcomes for ordinary folk. And then, yeah, like on top of that, you know, I've had many friends and some family go to jail, and what I've observed is, like, a lot of the people that end up in jail, man, they were just from the moment they were born, they've been victims of levels of child abuse, sexual abuse. They've just been abused, and they grow up abused, and they grow up in this cycle of fucked up plutonium grade trauma. And then the system re-traumatizes them. Like, there's no help from the system. The system just fucking tosses them in jail in the too hard basket, where they just, you know, only get upskilled in the skill of crime. So they come back out, not reformed, and then cause, you know, dramas, plunge other people into cycles of trauma by violently abusing or doing whatever else to them. So, you know, I can't really blame a lot of people in jail, because they're just, they're victims of circumstance, and that's what they'll be their entire life until, you know, generally they're fucking dead with a needle in their arm, or swinging from a noose, or fucking doing life. Like, that's generally the trajectory of these people's lives. And that's fucking no life, man. And the fact that the state is complicit in these people's lot in life, I think is a fucking disgrace, man. I think it's embarrassing. Like, with all the resources and shit we've got at our disposal, and all the knowledge and science, and these, you know, therapeutic medicines that are coming online legally as of like last week in this country, MDMA and psilocybin and stuff like this, which is now proven in multiple studies to help in, you know, curing trauma. To not be taking this shit into prisons, and to not be just giving these people a hand in bettering their lot in life. I find it embarrassing, man. I think it's just fucking disgraceful.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely not a system that's designed to help people succeed, you know. And I think one of the hardest things, and like I've talked with my brother about this. I was lucky enough never to have gone to adult prison. I spent most of my teenage years in and out of juvenile detention. From sort of, it went in there the first time at 13. It probably went back 10, 11, 12 times up to about 17. But I mean, one of the most difficult things I think to undo is like that violent sort of outlook that prison inculcates in you. Like, it's, you have to sort of adopt that to survive, you know. It's like, what, one of the first days I was in there, this kid explained it to me and said, like, you know, it's like, there might be two of you in the queue, and there's one strawberry jam left, and the one behind you says, nah, fuck you, that's my strawberry jam. And it's like, you have to stand up and fight. And it's not even about the strawberry jam. It's like, if that person's challenging you, if you back down and show yourself as weak, everybody else in there is going to walk all over you. They'll take everything off you. They'll push in front of you in the queue for phone calls. They'll steal your canteen because they saw that you didn't stand up for yourself, you know. And it's like, it's this kind of false masculine ideal of what strength is. I think, you know, it's kind of this need to be violent and put up this front. And like, I mean, really, I think like true strength and a true power, it doesn't need to be asserted in that sort of way. You know, it radiates outward. It comes from within. It's like it's a quiet strength. It's a quiet sort of power, and it brings other people up around you and lifts other people up as well. And I think not just in prison. I mean, yeah, but I think a lot of young men have got that confused as well. And prison sort of definitely confuses that a lot more, because it's that sort of outlook in there. It's necessary for survival. You have to. You don't. If you don't, it's going to make you. If you don't sort of put up that violent front, it's going to make your life even harder. You know.
Yeah, that's such a common tale from prison. And oh man, you're so right. That faux masculinity, that violence is a sign of strength kind of thing is such horseshit.
But it's a difficult thing to undo as well, you know. I mean, that's one thing I've really struggled with. Like, you know, that kind of mentality, it serves you well in there, but then you get outside and it's like, it's difficult to relate. Like, I found it really difficult to relate to people for a long time, and also to understand how I feel, and to, like, you know, that like violence and anger almost becomes like a default emotion, and it's like, I think by not allowing yourself to feel what things really are, by pushing them down and swallowing them, they harden and turn into something else, you know. And it's been difficult to come to understand that, and also to allow feelings to be what they need to be, and to express them in the way in which they need to, in the most natural way, in what it is for those things to come out, you know?
Yeah, it's well put, man. And violence and anger is a hard one to get a handle on, especially, you know, it's ironic. I guess that's been an issue for both of us, and both of us have ended up working in an industry that's dominated by upper class people. And there's a different social matrix that operates amongst the elites and the people that dominate the media and arts profession. And it's a social matrix in which violence has never been a reality in these people's lives. So in place of real violence and aggression, you end up with a level of passive aggression and snide comments and, you know, and kind of disrespectful or distrustful behavior that in my world would get you flogged, but you can't do that in that world. And, yeah, that's a really hard one to manage. I struggled with that because, yeah, I mean, I even like in the working class, like generally there's a way of conducting yourself because people know that, you know, you shouldn't tick a fucking bricklayer off, you know, or a plumber who's been sweating his fucking ring out for 4 hours. Like, yeah, like, so that social matrix, there's actually a great writer, Darren McGarvey. You should read some of his work. Darren McGarvey wrote Poverty Safari. He's a Scottish Housing Commission guy, and he talks a lot about this. He's a rapper as well, but yeah, he talks a lot about the different social matrix that exists between the lower class and upper class. And I feel like the threat of physical retribution for poor behavior is a real missing link as you go further up the class chain. And yeah, it just means that you do have to find a way to process anger and that emotion. Passive aggression is such a weird one to me because like it's just like the coward's aggression. Like it's the same thing, but it's hid behind a smile. And I don't see it as any better or worse than real aggression. Like it's the same thing. It's just the coward's way of doing it. So yeah, I feel for you, man. Like what has been?
It's funny though. Like a lot of criminal people I hung out with are actually probably some of the most honest people I've met. You know, because the rules of engagement are pretty implicit. You know, it's like if you rip someone off and do the wrong thing, it's like, well, there's a chance you're going to get seriously injured or killed. You know, so it's like, yeah.
Absolutely, man. I couldn't agree more. I think the honesty and authenticity goes up the further down the class rung you go. There's no doubt about that. There's no actors or phonies when you're down in the working class or working poor. Everything is as it is, and people, you know, call a spade down there, and that completely disappears as you move up the class rung. It's so discombobulating. I kind of got lost for years. I feel like hanging out with the media elites when I was trying to make a fist of it as a, you know, legitimate journalist for the big newspapers and all that. And I entered this, and I was in my mid to early 20s. I just got completely lost in this world where I didn't understand how to behave, and I spoke a bit different, and I had slightly different views and ways of doing things, and that made me a pariah, and you know, kind of could open me up to derision, and I didn't know how to deal with that either. And yeah, mate, I couldn't agree more. I feel so much at peace and at ease with people who, yeah, maybe they are fucking surly or in a bad mood or have some violent tendencies, but you know what you're getting, kind of deal. And it doesn't matter if they're not that nice all the time and they have this fucking performative front up that makes them seem like this nice person. I don't care for that. I just care for, like, I'm down with hard-boiled fucking semi-cuntish people. Like, there's just some goalposts there you got to kind of work around.
But I think like a lot of the kindest, most compassionate, most empathetic people I've met have all been ones who have struggled and gone without, you know, because they understand what's truly important. And at the end of the day, when you got nothing left, all you got is what's in here, you know, and that's what really counts, you know. Whereas I think I think people with money that have built their lives around money and material possessions, they've got it confused. You know, it's yeah. What's you know, I think having nothing comes to show you what's really important and what really matters.
Totally, man. Couldn't agree more. I've experienced a lot more forgiveness in those lower realms because, yeah, people are fucking up a lot. You know, you have to kind of be forgiving, and you understand that people aren't coming from perfect backgrounds. This is like, it seems like almost no one I knew came from a good home. So, you know, people have little spats and blow ups and flare ups, and you have to forgive that because you know what's going on in their world. And then when you go up, you know, people aren't necessarily from more loving homes in the wealthier rungs of society, but there is a social convention in how to behave and how not to behave. And if you flout that convention, yeah, you'll be written off, and there's not a lot of forgiveness there. You know, people can junk you, put you in the too hard basket very easily in that world. Whereas, yeah, in the lower class, you don't get people don't junk you almost like it didn't like people can do some pretty awful shit and still there'll be some people who will forgive you, and there'll be always people there who know what you've gone through, trying to kind of help and be around and just hoping that you're gonna eventually see the light. Yeah, but these are massive generalizations. Man, talk to us about just some of your memories from being incarcerated, like the stuff that's kind of stuck with you for better and for worse.
Probably like the first time I went in, I was 13 years old. I mean, I came from a good home and a good family. I mean, I think like you were saying, you know, our family had a lot of material wealth and possessions and these sorts of things. Like I spent the first 8 years of my life in London. I had like a really good life there. I had a private school education. Dad was working a good job. And then we moved to Australia, and the family sort of started to fall apart a bit. And I think like even though we had all these things and from the outside looking in, like our life was perfect, you know, it was a life of middle class affluence. I think one of the things that was missing was this ability for us all to communicate on an emotional level and to talk about the things that were going on inside of us and how we, you know, how we responded to those things. And so like that, because mum and dad didn't have those skills. Maybe their parents had never had those skills as well. And that's something I've come to understand over the years. I don't blame them for that. But yeah, I grew up never having had those skills as well. So when the family started to fall apart, I didn't really know how to respond to these things that were going on around of me and these things that were going on inside of me as well. So I sort of started playing up and you know, like smoking weed and getting into graffiti and this sort of thing. And I think everybody kind of looked at the problem and just sort of blamed drugs. I think it's a general thing in society to kind of just point to them. I mean, it's the easy option, isn't it? You know, I mean, I think for them to look deep and go, well, why is this really happening? That would have meant for mum and dad to have a good hard look at themselves as well. And I think, you know, that's emblematic of the way that society responds to these things. I think to resolve these things, it means that we have to have a good hard look at ourselves and the systems that we've set up and say, well, maybe these things aren't working. You know, maybe there's a better way of doing these things. So yeah, I mean, that was kind of the story that I was being told, that drugs were the problem. And I suppose it definitely became that way. I remember going into juvenile detention for the first time, and like it was the moment my childhood ended. You know, it was like, I think I got caught with like I was just a little kid. You know, I was 13 years old. I didn't really have access to any drugs. I was kind of just going to Coles with my mate after school and knocking off these like caffeine pills and snorting them in the back alley. And I'd stashed a whole lot of them in my room, and you know, mum found all this white powder in my room. And she asked me what it was, and I was angry with my parents. I didn't know how to tell them that I was angry and that I was hurt and that I was upset. So I just said nothing. I tried to punish my parents to show them how I felt, and they called the police. The police came, and there was like, because I'd mixed it up with like I'd heard you could make speed from cold and flu pills, so I put like crushed up a couple of cold and flu pills and put them in there. And yeah, the police did like a reactive test to see what this stuff was, and because they were cold and flu pills, it came back positive for methamphetamine. So they charged me with dealing ice.
Wow.
Yeah, and sort of and they kind of convinced my parents that the only solution was to send me to juvenile detention for a night, and went that, oh, this will scare him, this will shock him into change. But it sent me the complete other way. You know, it made me even angrier. It told me my family rejected me. It told me society rejected me, and just instilled this hatred of authority in me. You know, and that was the moment that my childhood ended. It was like my freedom, my childhood, my family. It was all gone. It all taken away in that second. It was pretty hard to come back from that as well.
Wow, that's a remarkable story, mate. That like literally bad parenting and bad policing ultimately was the catalyst for what became a decade or so of drug addiction and incarceration. Like, to think that everything could have been solved at that point with an honest fucking fishing or camping trip and a couple of heart-to-heart combos, like, you know, like that's a fucking mind blower, man.
True, but you know, I think my mum and dad, I think like any parents, I think they were good people doing the best they could with the skills that they had. And maybe they didn't have all the skills that they needed as well, because maybe that, like, you know, they kind of both came from pretty messed up families growing up, and maybe maybe their parents didn't have those skills. And I wonder sometimes, it's like, how far back does that go? You know, how many generations does that go? And I think, like, having gone through this struggle and through this journey, it's actually been a bit of a blessing, because it's helped me to come to realize that, like, it takes somebody in the family to realize that and go, oh, hang on, this is pretty messed up. I don't want to repeat this. And to kind of, it's helped me to learn that level of self-awareness that will avoid me replicating the same things in my life, if, you know, when I decide to have children and that sort of thing.
Mate, that's, yeah, intergenerational trauma. It's crazy. Like, the older you get, and you kind of look at your own life and you're like, fuck, like, how did I end up here in this situation? And then you look at your mom and dad's life, and then you look at their parents' life, and you're like, wow, this is actually, I'm part of a cycle here. And I've woken up to it, you know, whereas some of these, your forebears, they didn't wake up to it. It's not their fault. There wasn't the awareness and the education at that time. And then it often takes someone to really dip deep into the well of dysfunction and survive it, to then be like, oh, wow, like the buck's going to stop with me. I'm not going to let my kids experience this. And then it's up to you. You take on the burden of curing that trauma, which is no small load, in order to prevent your children from having it. And that's kind of the realization that you've had, and it's where you're at in life, and full credit to you, man. Like, you know, that they say if you can cure trauma, you cure it for 7 generations. So, I mean, that kind of suggests also how challenging it is to do. But, yeah, I don't even look at people anymore as good or bad people, you know, like, parents are just people that had children, and people are just the product of their circumstances and environment, pretty much. I mean, what is it? You get 50%, what is it? 50% genes, 50% the environment. And that's what makes you up as a human being. And so essentially your parents are responsible for 100% of who you are, like, you know, your genes, and they curate the environment too. And yeah, it takes you to a certain point to be able to forgive your parents. I think that's even like a passage in life. What do they call it? The forgiving your caregiver kind of. It's like a rite of passage almost in everyone's life. And yeah, like, you know, your parents made a decision that was the wrong one, and that they then have to live with that. But that's the call they made. And you've managed to survive it, and all things happen for a reason, in a sense. Like, you're now in a position to break the cycle, whereas if none of this happened, then you'd just be probably eking along, unhappy, stuck in the same sleepwalking cycle of bullshit that you're about to feed onto your own children.
It's true, yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I look back at this, and I think this really has been a blessing, you know. And I think it's probably a good thing that it happened for me so young as well. Like, I was really young, but I suppose, like, being so young, it gave me the opportunity also to be able to change my life before I was kind of tainted in a way. You know, I think once you go to adult prison, it's sort of a bit of a black mark against your name, and it just becomes harder and harder to come back from. So I think I was lucky that I made a lot of these realizations at a young age, and also that I came to realize these things when I didn't have too much to lose. You know, like, yeah, I didn't have a family that this would impact on as well. Like, I wasn't sort of in my middle age with a mortgage and kids and wife and that sort of thing, you know. So it's, yeah, I mean, it was sort of a blessing in disguise that it happened so young, really.
And let's talk about some of these turning points. I mean, we'll start with the worst first, which was you attempted to take your own life. Well, what was the circumstances that led up to that?
Yeah, there's probably three things that happened in pretty quick, like within maybe 18 months. The first was, like, I think everyone who uses drugs. Oh, sorry, I thought I lost you, Jed. Yeah, I think everyone who uses drugs, there comes a point where you're no longer doing it because it's fun. You're doing it because it's compulsion and it's habit, and that you kind of don't know anything else. You know, I think that point for me, like, that realization came when after a psychotic episode, I'd been up for about 10, 11, 12 days. And sort of, yeah, I went out on the street chasing someone with a meat cleaver who wasn't even there. And kind of one of my only memories of it is just being, like, cornered in this shopping center car park with, like, two big German Shepherd police dogs, like, stretching their handle as leashes, and a red dot on my chest. Yeah, and so that was kind of one of those first moments. I think the second was, I was trying to change, and it was just like, you know, like, that process is kind of it's defined by failure as well, you know. It's like, and yeah, you know, there was a time where I'd sort of relapsed, and it was back on the ice, and like, it'd been awake for 5 or 6 days or something, and it just all felt too hard, you know. I gave up on life. Like, and I tried to hang myself, like, from this beam in my mum's garage. Like, there were times before when I'd self-harmed. Most of the time they weren't serious. It was more just like a cry for help. It was just saying, like, look, I'm really hurting, I'm really struggling, I need some help. But this time I was serious. I wanted to die. I gave up, you know. And so I was hanging from this beam, and the beam, like, the two brackets on the beam, just snapped out of the wall. And I was sort of, I'd sort of started blacking out, and I found myself on the floor with this, like, kind of, you know, this beam sort of on my lap and tried to, yeah. So yeah, I suppose that day was kind of someone saying, no, not yet, you know. Yeah. But the third and probably the biggest turning point for me, like, I'd sort of started to change my life a little bit before this happened. Like, I'd gone to Europe and discovered the joys of travel, and you know, found other ways spent some time with my uncle in Switzerland in the mountains snowboarding, and saw that there was another way to live out there, and there were other ways to find joy and meaning in life. And I'd sort of come back and was kind of like, it had been a little bit of a circuit breaker for me, but I was still sort of like, yeah, I mean, I was still kind of, I mean, my friends are my friends, you know. I was still sort of hanging out with them, and one time I get this phone call from sort of two of my best mates, and they'd said that something really serious had happened. They wouldn't say what it was over the phone, but they were both like brothers to me. I would have done anything to help them, because I felt they'd done the same for me at times. And I told them to come around and get me. It was sort of midnight when they called. I waited up until 4, and yeah, like tried to call them back. Both of their phones were off. Oh, that's a bit weird. And like their phones were off for the next 2 weeks. I sort of was wondering what was going on until I saw both of their like Facebook profile pictures on the news with homicide detectives looking for them both. They'd both killed someone. And I remember not long after that, like I hadn't been at school much, sort of through year 9, 10, 11. And then I remember, this is probably at the beginning of year 12, and I remember sort of being at school, and we were talking about going to see careers counselors and this sort of thing. And I just kind of had this moment where it was like, it was a realization that I arrived at this fork in the road. It's like you can go down this road, you can keep going down this road. This is what waits for you down there. It's like, yeah, it's either prison or the cemetery, or it's like, here's an opportunity to like do something with your life and make something of it. And it was like, I remember not long after I got my license and sort of started to reconnect with surfing. And I remember sort of going on the first surfing and camping trip with a mate, like driving down to Margaret River, and it sort of drove past this turn off into bushland where, like, just a couple of weeks earlier, both of my best mates had buried the body of someone that they'd killed, and yeah, I just kept driving down to the beach.
Wow, such a trippy sliding doors moment, man.
Mm.
What were the circumstances of the murder in the end?
Oh, it was pretty brutal. It happened sort of over nothing. They were all off their head on ice, and someone came around to sell them some ice. They were planning on ripping him off. And my mate Sam, the guy who came, the dealer who came around to sell him some gear, Sam was really close with his partner, who was pregnant with this guy's kid. And this guy had come around and was saying, oh, I don't, like, he was saying he didn't want the kid and he was going to bash his missus and kill the kid. And like, both of my mates had sort of been up for a couple of days, and in their twisted sort of state of mind, they thought, oh, we have to kill him to stop this from happening. So yeah, it was a pretty violent and brutal murder. He just bashed him to death pretty much.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, I mean, there's the literal definition of insanity, like just the three people in various stages of drug psychosis, like talking horseshit, and leads to the murder of one of them. It's insane, man. There was also I understand some people that were pretty pivotal in helping you see the light, and one of them was this epic boxing coach you had from Africa. Man, tell us about this guy. This guy sounds like a fucking icon.
Yeah, he's a lord, Jerry. He's I first met him when I was in juvenile detention. He's like, I don't know, he was an art and music teacher there, and like everyone kind of wanted to be in Jerry's class. He was someone that like a lot of kids really looked up to and respected. I think because like with Jerry, he understood this struggle because he'd lived it and breathed it himself, and I think one of the things that a lot of kids could take from him was that like he wasn't just someone like reading these things from a textbook. He understood, and so yeah, Jerry had like he grew up in Mozambique during the Civil War. He would tell us these stories. We'd sit, if there'd been no violence in the class, he'd read us all a story, and like the kids in his class, we were kids who didn't listen to anyone, we didn't listen to the magistrate or the police. But when Jerry talked, when he told us one of these stories, everyone was quiet, like hanging on to every word. And so yeah, he'd grown up in Mozambique during the Civil War. He was one of 24 kids. His dad had 5 wives.
Get it out.
Yeah. And when he got to about 18, he was going to be drafted to fight in the Civil War, and the way he'd grown up, he went, no, I don't want to fight in somebody else's war. I don't believe in that. I'm not going to do that. So he left, He left with two mates. He walked to South Africa. It took him 6 months, and then ended up like he had some family living in Soweto in the slums of Johannesburg. And while he was there, there was kind of a lure of crime and easy money. I think one of his older brothers was a thug who was sort of trying to get him to come and join this gang of carjackers. But Jerry said, no, that's not, like, you know, that's not who I am. That's not what I'm about. He wanted to build a happy and positive life. And I think his way of doing that was through music and art. I think music's one of those things that are really important to people, especially in slum areas and that sort of thing. You know, you see the music that comes out of those poor areas, and it's like, yeah, when you got nothing else, you know, that's one of the only things you got. It's, you know, that's one of those things that can bring you joy and uplift you out of the struggle, you know. So yeah, for him it was music and art, and then boxing was also kind of a way of earning a small income, and discovering that true strength within yourself, you know, that true strength and that true power. And so yeah, they were the things in which he built his life around, and he brought those things to he met an Australian teacher who was traveling through Africa, and they ended up marrying and coming to Australia together, and he brought those things to Australia as well. I think when he was in his mid-20s, his older brother was murdered in prison. And I think it was, you know, one of the biggest regrets he said he had was that he'd never told his brother that he loved him. He was saying he grew up in a family where love wasn't really openly expressed, especially among men. And that was one of the biggest regrets that he had. And I think in that moment, he decided that he was going to dedicate his life to helping other young men avoid making the same mistakes. And so when he migrated to Australia, he brought that mission with him, and was running a fitness program, and then eventually found a job in this juvenile detention center, which was where I met him. And he had a big influence on my life. You know, I later joined the gym and started boxing with him, and he was a true role model. He understood. He could relate to these things, and he was one of the few positive role models that I was permeable to.
Man, that's fascinating that one man can have more of an influence and more of an impact than an entire legislative and policing system, you know? Like, you can go through all these fucking rungs of the judicial system and not one of them gets through to you. And one guy who's the real deal, who has a bit of compassion and has walked a similar path, that one person can change the lives of who knows how many people. And I think there's such a lesson in that like, really, and it's not a lesson either of us need to hear, because it's so obvious. Like, when you associate with thugs and criminals and hard men and the fucking wannabe hard men, like, you see that the only people they listen to are the people that they respect, and the people that they respect are people that have walked a similar path, and really that's it. So ideally, there's those people who have walked that path but then come out the other side of it, and those are the people that can have an impact in the in the prison systems and the judicial process. But of course, it's pure luck and good fortune that they end up in there. Like your friend there, like, you know, that was just fortuitous that he ended up in front of you. But yeah, there needs to be a fucking army of people like that. And fortunately, with podcasts, actually, you know, we're kind of approaching that place. You know, you got I think some of Australia's best podcasts, in my opinion, are all done by ex-cons, and it's like, it's so ironic. We started as a penal colony, and now, like, our greatest cultural export, it seems, is like storytelling by ex-cons. Brant over at the Clink, Spanian, just to name a couple. There's a heap of them around, but I love listening to these guys, and they have so much wisdom and forgiveness, and Yeah, like I respect so much what they have to say because they've lived it, and there's just so much truth in their existence, and they're all survivors of insane levels of trauma, and they've had to transcend so much pain and suffering in their life, and they don't glorify the world that they come from. Whereas like a kid on the street may see glory in being a gangster or a thug, but once you listen to the guys who've survived that lifestyle, it makes you want to fucking run as far from it as you can.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and I think one of the things, like with the system, that whole idea of like punishing people to try and fix them, it's never going to work. You know, I think like Jerry was the solution that system couldn't offer me, because he offered me kindness and compassion and love and empathy. And I think that's the only way to resolve these things, you know. It's the only way forward. It's, yeah, I mean, punishing people to try and fix them, it's never going to work, you know. It's only going to make people angrier and more hateful. And yeah.
Mate, that's so perfectly and simply put. There's such a perfect distillation of everything that's wrong with the prison system and the way we view it. And what about drug decriminalization? I mean, I've been reading that book, Chasing the Scream. Have you heard of this book or read this book?
No.
By Johan Hari. Like, he's the best young journalist in the world. He's got that, Stolen Focus, and Lost Connection, and they all center around the modern condition, and essentially mental illness is lost connection. Stolen Focus is all about the way that technology is basically corrupting and corroding our brains, and Chasing the Scream is all about drug policy and why it is the way it is and how ineffective it's been. And the places where it is effective are places like Portugal, where drugs have been decriminalized, and you can, and places like Liverpool in the 90s, and various places have trialed this process of decriminalizing drugs. And what they find generally is when people have access to drugs that are clean, that are readily available and prescribed by GPs, you know, literally giving people heroin and cocaine. I don't know about meth. I don't think meth kind of falls under this conversation necessarily. I'm not too sure. You have to do your own research on that one. But generally what happens is people take the drugs, they use them to keep themselves afloat, and they, on their own willpower, quite easily manage to wean off them. But it really, then they work, they function, they work jobs, they raise families, and they just have this habit that slowly decreases over time. This is what the data says. This isn't controversial. This is in the science and the studies that are being done, and it's real world shit that's happened in the past. So yeah, I recommend anyone who's interested in reading that book. But I don't want to lead you with that kind of statement or policy, because meth might be a different kettle of fish. But yeah, what is your take on the way drugs are viewed by society?
I think, like, people say, like, you know, there's this common idea that marijuana is a gateway drug, and by, you know, taking drugs, it's going to lead you to become a criminal. I think the gateway is not so much the drug itself, but the fact that it is criminalized, and that to go and get these things, you have to go and get them from criminal people. And you're going to be, you know, by going to criminal people and getting these things, you're going to be exposed to a different outlook on life. You're going to be exposed to criminal things, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think also by treating this as a health problem and a social problem, which it really is, you know, it allows to have access to people who may otherwise be hard to access, and to really treat these things, you know. I think a lot of people who use drugs, people look at drugs as the problem. Drugs are never the problem, you know. Drugs are just somebody's way of dealing with an underlying kind of problem that they don't know how to resolve. And it's only when you get the drugs out of the way that you can actually deal with those real underlying problems. And some people, you know, like a lot of people live normal, functional lives who do never deal with those problems, you know. Everybody kind of, you know, yeah, everyone finds an outlet for those things in something, whether that's constructive or destructive, like, you know, whether that's surfing or travel or like gambling or sex or drinking or whatever, you know. It's like, yeah, there's always, like, I think dealing with the real underlying stuff is the real problem, you know. And that's the hardest part about getting off drugs as well. It's not so much like it's getting that surface problem out of the way and then dealing with those underlying things, and that takes years, you know. For a lot of people it takes an entire lifetime. It's like, I feel like that's something that never stops as well, where kind of life is just this constant process of improvement and growth, you know.
It's such a good point, man. The way drugs are viewed by society, that when they're criminalized, you know, if there is a teenager looking to rebel, then smoking pot seems like a really good way to rebel, right? And it fits with that identity. And then you go get the pot and you're scoring it off some fucking older crim with gold chains and shit. And that becomes a further push in the direction of that identity of rebellion. But it would change very much so if you're getting that pot from a fucking chemist and the dude in there before you is fucking 65 with white hair and he goes and jumps in his mobile home afterwards, you know, like, you're like, oh, this isn't rebellion. Fuck, what's this? This sucks. Like, I want to rebel, damn it. And like, just a further point to add, you know, I think our society, this Western capitalist consumer reality we inhabit, is deeply mentally ill, because there is so little joy really that can be gained from a material reality. I'd say almost zero. Like, really, the material reality, all it can offer you is the ability to have your bases covered. So having stable housing, food, and yeah, that's about it. And a car that works. Like, so you know, the material reality can alleviate stress, but it can't create joy or purpose. And so living in a society and a matrix that really is only about the material reality, there's no respect given to spirituality or community or like, everything's all about, you look at every advertisement and every hero of the media, it's all about just living your best, most affluent life in some far-flung destination in some fucking designer clothes or some high-end European car. Like, every cunt who lives like that is no better off than the dude living in the slum in Soweto in many different ways, in the ways that matter. Like, I just got back from India, and one thing I noticed was, yeah, it was almost like the poorer the neighborhood, the like happier people were, in the sense of, like, I don't want to glorify poverty, but what I'm saying is that when people grow up poor, they find wealth in other ways, like you said, through music and art. In India, it was also a lot about just human connection, the strength of community, the power of good interactions constantly to uplift. And this is not the way we live here. And we're fucking miserable because of it. And you look at the way the West postures around the world, constantly in fucking war, constantly stealing more material resources from other places. You know, we're sick fucks. So I'm fucking, yeah, man. I just, that's what my travels have led me to believe. And, you know, the slums in Soweto, not the best example, because they live in a world of violence and criminality as a result of the most insane levels of inequality and the post-apartheid situation and just this heavily racialized economic inequality. But, you know, yeah, other parts of the world, yeah, the saying poor people have more fun does really ring true.
For sure, yeah, and I think that's this idea that like you say, that capitalism is selling us as well. You know, yeah, you know, these material things equal status, and kind of that's what everyone's out looking for. But it's, yeah, I mean, I suppose one thing I've learned and is to build a life based around experience and stories. You know, because I think at the end of the day, that's, to me, the way I see my life. All it really is a collection of stories, you know, and at the end of the day, no one can take those things away, you know. It's, yeah. So yeah, I suppose I've designed a different kind of life, like, yeah, traveling around Indonesia on this motorbike, a life of complete freedom and experience, because they're the things that I've come to discover are truly important, you know?
Absolutely. I would caution one thing with travel, and this is such a recent revelation for me, because I, like yourself, spent a lot of my 20s. I lived in Asia for years in Bali, and I thought travel was the great gift. And I think it can be, but also, you know, and this is just more for listeners and as well as yourself, man. It's really based off a fucking New Yorker article I read the other day called "The Case Against Travel," and I recommend any travelers, people who love travel, to read it, because it was a fascinating read. It basically stacked all of these heavyweight philosophers from through the generations on top of each other, making the case against travel. And the basic case against travel was that you lose your routine and structures, and your diet changes. So your gut health changes. Your gut health is where your serotonin's generated. Like, there's just all these disruptions to your life that are brought about by travel. So, and not to mention the expectation that travel will in itself be transcendent. So when you get to spot X, Y, Z, that you're going to feel different. And that's dangerous, because a lot of the time you reach that place and you don't feel any different. Sometimes you feel even worse because your sleep routines are off, your food's different. So yeah, it's worth walking into the lifestyle of travel with your eyes wide open, and knowing that you're generally not the best version of yourself when you're traveling, just because you don't have the foundations, the structure, the routine that really the anatomy craves, whether we like it or not. The brutal reality of being a human being is that it demands certain things at certain times of the day, and the more you are committed to that, you know, what do they say? You talked about freedom, and they say structure is freedom. And I think that is very true when it comes to human beings. That said, I'm just telling you that. So, you know, like, so, you know, like that there's also this other argument out there, and just so, you know, so you can be aware and take care of yourself as you undertake this epic journey, man. I'd fucking love to call you at different points during the journey, bro.
Yeah.
We'll link up for a few more interviews along the way. I'd love to hear how it goes.
Yeah,
Don't let me stop you.
Yeah. That'd be epic, bro, for sure. Yeah.
But man, I'll let you go. I mean, I really appreciate the time that you've given us. I know that you've written a lot of articles, and so if you'd like to, you know, recommend to anyone bits that you're proud of from your like catalog of articles, stuff for people to read, that I'd love that. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. I'm on social media as Stories from the Scenic Route. It's all on my website as well, www.storiesfromthescenicroute.com. And yeah, I'll be documenting the journey across Indo as well. Scenic Route TV on YouTube. So
epic.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Mental, man. And anything else you want to leave us with? Anything we haven't covered that you think's important?
Just to be kind, you know. One thing you're like, one, you know, I think like one of the most important things that like I've learned is to be kind to other people, but also be kind to yourself as well, you know. So yeah, just like if I could leave with just 2 words, it'd just be that, you know, just be kind.
Epic, mate. Really appreciate your story and your journey, Tom. I think it's a shining light for a lot of people. And mate, I think these are the stories that we need to hear more of. And thank God for podcasts, for enabling us to get them out there in this raw and unfiltered format. Sick, man.
Right on. Thanks, Smithy. Thanks for having us on the show, bro. Legend.
Good on you, brother. Take care, man.
Cheers, man.